Okay, we are at Pesahim Daf Nun Bet. We're going to start off with a very interesting story about Yom Tov Sheni, controversy regarding that. And then the rest of the daf will be about laws of Sheviit and moving from one place to another, from a place where their fruit is available to a place where there's not available, and other laws that just have to do with Sheviit itself, 3 different lands, fruit taken out of Israel. What's the status of unripe fruit? Okay, the Gemara beforehand was talking about different cases of someone that travels to another area and recognizes that people in the local place are practicing a certain custom that is not their custom or not required, and should they tell them something or not. So now we're going to apply that to Yom Tov Sheni. You probably don't know anybody like this, but I have 1 or 2 people in my Bet Knesset whose favorite topic is to complain about Yom Tov Sheni. So this is for them. Amar le Rav Safra le Rabbi Abba, kegon anan diadinan bekbi'a diyarcha biyishuv la'abidna mipnei shinoi hamachloket. So these 2 sages of Rav Safra and Rabbi Abba, they say, we know the calendar. We know how to calculate when Rosh Chodesh is, when the holidays are. And therefore, we really don't have to keep Yom Tov Sheni. Nevertheless, when we are in the city, we are in the settled area with other Jews. We do not do our own opinion. In other words, we practice what everybody else is doing because of machlok. We don't want to make any dispute, so we follow along what everybody else in diaspora are doing. Okay, Bamidbar Mai. So the question is, what about when they are on their own? In other words, when they're alone in the desert, when no one's going to see them, it will not cause a dispute. Would they, even in that case, work on Yom Tov Sheni? Says yes, right? They're going to follow the Ameh, that when there is a difference of custom or practice, then when you're around other people, it's prohibited. But when you're in the desert by yourself, it's permitted. So quite an amazing thing. They relied on their calculation and they did not keep Yom Tov Sheni. Tosafot here explains that they're really from Eretz Yisrael and they came outside, so that's why they know it. But the truth is, the pshat sounds like wherever they are, they would not keep it. Rav Natan bar Asya azal mibe Rav lepumpedita b'Yom Tov Sheni shel aseret. Another sage, Rav Natan, when he went to Pumpedita, he traveled on Yom Tov Sheni, certainly violating Tuchum Shabbat and whatever else. In other words, and this is in Pumpedita, this is in Bavel, outside of Eretz Yisrael. So in other words, he didn't follow Yom Tov Sheni. What happened to him? Shamteh Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef excommunicated him. In other words, he took this very seriously, even more than violating general D'Rabbanan, right? He wanted to make sure that nobody else would follow this example, and he would stop doing it too. And so he was excommunicated for that behavior. Amar le Abaye ulnagdeh mor lenegideh. So Abaye asked, why didn't you give him lashes? How come you only gave him excommunication? Right? We should hit him to set an example. Do something worse. Amar le adifa abadi le dim ma'araba mimnu anegida. I did worse. Excommunication is worse than lashes because in the West, meaning in Israel, they get together and vote regarding flogging. In other words, they have to have a whole deliberation to see does he deserve it or not. When it comes to excommunication, that's for things that are so bad they just do that right away and don't even wait for voting. So therefore, you see that I did the worst thing I could do to him, excommunicated him. That's one version of the story. A second version says, Ika de Amre, Nagdeh Rav Yosef. Others say that, in fact, he gave him lashes. This is Rav Natan, who traveled on Yom Tov Sheni. Why didn't you excommunicate him? Because that's worse. Rav Shmuel Damre Tarvaihu. Rav Ushmuel Damre Tarvaihu. Minadin al Shenei Yamim Tovim Shel Galuyot. Both Rav and Shmuel say that you should excommunicate someone for violating Yom Tov Sheni. Yes, that's true. For a regular person, you would give excommunication, which is the worst punishment. However, but here I was dealing with a sage, the taba le abadi. So I gave him a little preferential treatment. I treated him better. And similarly, because in the West they do vote regarding flogging a scholar, but not regarding punishment. And so we see that flogging is better because they sit and deliberate, and maybe you would usually get him off the hook somehow. So that's two versions of it. Both agree that excommunication is worse. One says they excommunicated him like they would anybody else. The second version says they only flogged him to give him a break because he was a rabbi. Okay. Anyway, you see that even back then there were some sages that tried to do away with Yom Tov Sheni because they weren't using the witnesses anymore. They were making Rosh Chodesh based on witnesses in the Bet HaMikdash, but rather they were all using a calendar. Nevertheless, the majority of rabbis continued Yom Tov Sheni and strongly put down the practice of those minority rabbis. All right, and now we get to the last part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, if you remember, ended with Sheviit. It says Kayose bo hamolich perot Sheviit. And so we had two opinions there, right. The Mishnah had said, I think it's worth going back to the Mishnah to see it. Here. Okay. Said al yeshane adam mipnei hamachloket. Right. Whenever you're going from one place to another, you should impose the stringencies of both places, and don't be different because you don't want to create dispute. That's true regarding working on Erev Pesach. And similarly, kayotze bo is someone who brings perot sheviit from a place where they are ceased to grow, to be in the field, to a place where they are still there. All right. Remember, the halacha of Sheviit is as long as there is produce available, freely available in the fields, anyone can go and take and eat for private use and give to their animals. Once whatever olives there's no more olives, then whatever olives you have stored in your home, you have to get rid of. Bi'ur, like bi'ur chametz, this is also bi'ur for the Sheviit produce. Some say you have to destroy it. Others say you just have to put it back out and make it hefker so anyone can eat it. So if you're going from one place to another, where in one place it's available, in other place it's not available, or the other way around, you have to destroy it, you have to get rid of it. That's Tanna Kamma. So he's the stringent opinion. The Yehuda says, why should we be stringent? I went and traveled an hour and I brought that produce from somewhere else. You could do that too. So it is available. Why are you saying it's not available here? Right? Just like I brought it from a different place, you could also bring it from a different place. So according to the Yehuda, if it's available by any means, that's still considered available. And so therefore, one is allowed to keep it and eat that even in a place where in the local place it's not available. Okay, so the first opinion is more stringent. The Yehuda is more lenient. What we're going to see in the following discussion is they're going to switch them around and add eno chayav leva'et here and make the Tanna Kamma the lenient one and the Yehuda the stringent one. Okay, that's the only confusing part of it. Otherwise, it's straightforward. And so let's get back. We're going to see 5 different opinions regarding this, the explanation of this Mishnah. So we start off the question. Let Rabbi Yehuda haditnan notnin alav chomer hamakom sheyasa misham vechomer hamakom shehalach lesham. The Mishnah says you have to keep the stringencies of both places, where you came from and where you went to. So how could Rabbi Yehuda say, if I'm now in a new place and the new place doesn't have any more of these olives, but the place I came from had olives, that I can continue to eat the olives because I can go back, I can rely on the place where I came from. How could that be? The Mishnah just said you have to rely on the stringencies. Doesn't he agree with that principle? Okay, 5 answers. Amar Rav Shesha bered Rav Idi. Milta hariti ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda. Says actually this statement of Rabbi Yehuda was talking about a different case altogether, not a case where it went from a place that had fruit and to a place that didn't, or the other way around. But as follows: Omi makom shelo kalu lemakom shelo kalu. We're talking about a place there that had olives, and I went to another place that has olives. So that's totally fine according to everybody. Here's the thing: B'shama shekalu bimkomo. While he's in the new place, he heard that where he came from, olives have finished. But when he left, they had olives, but now they don't have them anymore. And now he's in the new place where they do have olives. So in that case, Tanna Kamma says hayav leva'ed, because right now in the place he came from, they don't have olives, and you came from there, so you have to take that stringency. And in this case, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Seva be'lecha af ata, mehecha da'aitinhu, v'ha lo kalu lehu. Yeah, so Rabbi Yehuda says the person can say, you can go and bring yourself, right? In other words, you could have brought, like me. I brought them at a time when they were available. So they continue to have that status of being available. And I don't have to care that right now they're no longer available. So the stringencies of the place you came from is and the place you're going to are okay with them, because when he left, it was permitted. And now the place he is now, they are also permitted. He doesn't have to now change his status based on something that happened after he left. Okay, doesn't fit the words as well as the simple explanation, but this way we can reconcile the Yehuda with the general rule. Okay, so that's answer number 1, Rav Shesha, when both places have not ceased. But now we're going to say it must be the opposite, and the Yehuda is actually the stringent one. Why are we saying that? Lememra the Yehuda lekula ka'amar, v'hamar Rabbi Elazar lo amar Rabbi Yehuda ela lechumra. So Rabbi Elazar has a tradition regarding Rabbi Yehuda that he is the stringent one. So now we have to re-explain the Mishnah. We got it wrong, right? Rabbi Yehuda is the stringent one. How are we going to explain it in such a way? Ela ipuch. Okay, we're going to have to switch around the opinions. Eno chayav leba'ed. Tanna Kamma says he does not have to get rid of the fruit that he brought from another place. Now that's the lenient opinion. Rabbi Yehuda omer se v'habe lecha af ata mehecha da'aitinhu v'ha kalu lehu. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, can you go back and bring from the place where I came from? No, because they don't have them anymore. So therefore, now also here in this new place, you're not allowed to have them. Okay, so that's it's interesting that the same phrase we can interpret opposite ways. So that's the second interpretation. Third interpretation, Abaye amar leolam kedekatane. He says, no, leave the case as it was, not a case where there was fruit when I left, and then after I got there, the fruit was gone from the place I came from. No, there's a regular case, as the Mishnah says. He seems to be presenting a simpler case, but he actually ends up talking about a more complicated case. What happens is I started in place A, and then I went to place B, and then I went back to A. Okay, so in place A, they have the fruit, right? There are olives available. I went to B, there's no olives available in B. Then I went back to A when there still are olives available. So that's the question. Does it change status because I went to B? Or since I started in A and I'm still in A, are they still available? So Tanna Kamma says, "Eno chayav leva'er." You don't have to get rid of it because here I'm here. They came from here, so it's totally fine. Rabbi Yehuda omer, "Seva belechaf ata mehechad aitinhu v'hakalu lehu." Rabbi Yehuda would say, "So let me see. You go and go to place B and see if you can find olives. That you can't because there's none there either. So you have to take, even though you only stopped there and came back, you have to take that into account. And yes, they become prohibited when you go to a place where they are no longer available." That's the third opinion. Matkif la Rav Ashi Rabbi Yehuda atu agaba dechamra kalatinhu. So Rav Ashi doesn't like that answer. He says, "What? While they're on the back of the donkey, does the donkey, absorb them, and now they became prohibited just because they happened to be on the donkey's back when it passed through city B? What are you talking about? They grew in place A. They're from place A. Now you're back there. So, and olives are still available. So it doesn't make sense that even the Yehuda would prohibit such a case. Rather, Ella Amar Rav Ashi. Now this is his interpretation. It's less of an interpretation of the details of the case, but rather he's going to show a parallel dispute among Tanaim. And so, since there's a parallel dispute, his point is simply that they are following a more general pattern of leniency and stringency regarding availability of fruit. Let's see. Hakobesh shelosha kebashin bechabit achat. Let's say a person's pickling assorted vegetables. He has cucumbers, carrots, and cauliflower, all in the same jar. And so now each one gives some taste to the other. What is going to be the case regarding if one of those, let's say cucumbers, there's no more cucumbers in the field, but there's still carrots and cauliflower. So now what? Can the person eat the other vegetables? Does he? Well, for sure he can't eat, or maybe not. Maybe he can eat all of them because they're all mixed together, or he can't eat any of them. So there's all three possibilities. Rabbi Elazar Omer Ochlin al Harishon says as soon as any one of those three types of vegetables are gone from the fields, that person cannot eat any of the pickles in the jar because they're all mixed up with each other. So if there's no more cucumbers, and now that cucumber taste is mixed in with the other ones, so you can't eat the entire jar. That's the most stringent opinion. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Af al Acharon. Rabbi Yoshua says you can keep eating until all three are gone from the field, right? Because after all, even if the cucumbers are gone, you're eating a mixture, and part of the mixture is permitted, so the whole thing is allowed until cucumbers, carrots, and cauliflower are all gone. Then you have to stop eating the pickles. Okay, that's the most lenient opinion. Rabban Gamliel's in the middle. He says, "Kol shekala mino min hasedei ve'ad mino min habit." This is why I make it so complicated. Go by each one. Once there's no more cucumbers, don't eat the cucumber in the pickle jar, but you could eat the rest of them. And when there's no carrots, don't eat that. Then you still could eat the rest of them. Each one, doesn't matter if they're mixed up, you still go by each one on its own. Okay, so based on that, we have to fill in the rest of it. So that is the machloket, and then with the parallel would be as follows: that the Tanna Kamma in our Mishnah that says when you go from one place to the other, it's okay, right? You can you don't have to get rid of the Sheviit fruit. That's the lenient opinion. He's going to follow Rabbi Yoshua here, who is also the lenient opinion. In other words, according to Rabbi Yoshua, as long as there's any possibility of eating the mixture, you can eat it, even if there's only one species. So too, if the place you came from still has the olives and the place you're going to doesn't, or the other way around, as long as it's some way to permit it, they're going to find a way to permit it. So, and the Rabbi Yehuda, who's the one that's stringent, is going to follow Rabbi Elazar's opinion. In other words, that whatever has to be available to all of them have to be available to everybody. So you need all the species in the jar to be available, otherwise not good. And similarly, you need both cities where you came from and came to also has to be available, otherwise not. He's always looking to be stringent. So those opinions match up with each other. All right, that was the fourth, and now the fifth and last. Ravina Amar b'plugta dehane Tanae titnan. He's also going to match it up with another machloket Tanaim. Ochlin bit marin al sheichla acharon shebe so'ar. The Tanna Kamma says you can continue eating dates in all of Judea until the last palm tree. So'ar was known for have a lot of palm trees. The last palm trees has no more dates. In other words, we consider all of Judea to be one area, and even if you're on the other side of Judea and not far away from those trees, that's okay. That the whole area is considered one, and you can continue eating until there are no palm trees at all in Judea. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer ochlin al shel ben hakefin ve'en ochlin al sheben hashisin. So a bit Rashbag is more limited. He says you can continue eating dates as long as there are some dates among the palm branches, but some of the dates fall onto the thorns, and those the animals can't get to. It's hard for them to eat. And so he says at that point we consider that as if there's no dates because they're not easily accessible. It's as if they are gone totally. Whereas Tanna Kamma says no, even if there's dates on the thorns, there's still dates somewhere. And so too we can match up the opinions in that way, that Rashbag would be parallel to the Yehuda. Rashbag, who says that dates have to be readily available, Soti would say they have to be available in the place you came from and in the place you went to. Because he can say, why, can you go and get dates yourself? You have to be able to answer yes to that question. Whereas Tanna Kamma here will follow the Tanna Kamma in our Mishnah, that as long as they are available in some way to anyone, it's permitted. Okay, so that concludes the 5 interpretations of our Mishnah. And basically, Tanna Kamma says that as long as it's available to some people somewhere, then it's okay. And you have some of those olives, they're available somewhere, that's fine. The Yehuda says no, it has to be equally available to everybody in every place. And only in that, that's what's considered available. Otherwise, you have to get rid of it. Okay, last 3 topics are the 3 lands for Sheviit, and then if you take the fruit out of Israel altogether, and then unripe fruit. Okay, so Mishnah says, Tanana tam shalosh aratzot labior, Yehuda, ve'Eber hayarden, ve'Galil. Okay, so there are 3 basic areas, right? The Galilee, Judea, and the Transjordan. And point being that if you have some olives here in Jericho, and I live over here next to the sea, as long as there are olives in Jericho, I'm allowed to continue eating olives that I had stored in my house down in Lod. This is all considered one geographical area, and only when it's gone from the whole area, then I have to get rid of it from my house also. But that's separate from this area and that area. They're judged by themselves. Okay, now within each of these 3 lands, shalosh aratzot bechol achat ve'achat. There's 3 subdivisions within each of the lands, between the plain, the valley, and the mountain. The subdivisions have no effect on halacha. So now we ask, that was the Mishnah. Lama amiru the Mishnah continues. Lama amiru shalosh arasot labiur shiu ochlin bechol achat ve'achat ad sheichla acharon sheba. Okay, so why do we say that there's 9? There are actually 9 different lands, right? So why does the Mishnah say there's 3, and each of the 3 is made up of 3? To teach you that these 3 go together, these 3 go together, these 3 go together. So you're right, there's 9, but since they're grouped into 3 groups of 3, it's the 3 that's important. Good. How do we know this? What's the source? Amar Rav Chama bar Ukba, Amar Rabbi Yose bar Chanina, Amar Kera, v'libhemtecha v'lachaya asher be'arsecha. This is all the Pesahim and Sheviit that say don't work the land, but rather anything that grows is available for your domesticated animals and for your wild animals that are in your land. So it's comparing domesticated animals to wild animals. As long as there is this fruit produce available in the field for a chaya, in other words, it's freely available, then you can also feed it to your domesticated animals that are in your home. So you can take some portion of it, keep it in your home, only as long as there's something available in the field. However, however, once there's no more for the animals outside, so too you have to take everything that you stored in your house and do bi'or and get rid of it. Okay, so that's how we learn it. Ugmiri de'en haya shebihuda gedala al perot shebagalil. We're continuing to explain why the 3 laws, why the 3 lands. Okay, the wild animals, they will travel, and they'll travel from the plain to Jerusalem to Jericho looking for food. But an animal down here is not going to travel up to the Galilee, and an animal up here is not going to travel to Transjordan. Therefore, since these are geographical areas where animals of the wild will move around, so as long as they can move around and find something to eat, that's permitted for what you have in your house, otherwise not. All right, that's good. Now, tenor banan perot sheyasu me'eretz Yisrael lechutz haaretz mitba'arin bechol makom shehen. Now, if I had some fruit and there was something available, there was still available in the land, and I took it outside of the land of Israel, and then there ends up being no more fruit available in the fields, I have to get rid of it. So wherever I am, or even if I took it to Bavel, to New York, I have to get rid of it wherever I am. That's Tanna Kamma. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, yachzeru lemkoman v'yitba'aru. No, I have to bring them back to wherever, to Israel, to where I got them from, and I have to destroy them. Makes more sense to say make them hefker again. I have to go and put them back out in the field in that place in Israel. Why? Mishum shenemar be'arsecha. So because it says out in your land, so it has to be not only does this whole law of Sheviit apply in your land, but even the making available to the animals and to everyone who's living there is also in your land. So I have to bring it back. Okay. So question on Rashbag, right? Afikte. Right. So this pasuk Barsecha. Wait, how could you learn this law from Barsecha that I have to go back to the land of Israel in order to make it hefker again? You already used this word to teach that there are three different lands, Barsecha, this section of land, that section of land. So you can't use that pasuk again. He answers, Karibe ba'aretz ba'arsecha. No, within the word ba'arsecha is also ba'aretz. So the plain word ba'aretz teaches you have to go back to the land. Ba'arsecha is specifically that section of land. So I can actually learn two things from that one word, or another way, iname me'asher ba'arsecha, from the two words, the word asher and arsecha, both of those words together can teach me these two laws. All right, very good. Now we're going to have a fascinating story. Rav Safra nefak me'eretz Yisrael lechutz la'aretz. When the story itself is pretty plain, but the discussion that comes after it is very interesting. So Rav Safra went from Israel to outside the land of Israel. Hava behadeh garba dechamra de Sheviit. And perhaps by mistake, he took with him a whole jug of wine that was made from Sheviit grapes. And so now this is a problem. So the question is it a problem? Rav Safra was walking with his colleagues, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, and Rav Kahana. Amar lehu, Ika deshmi aleh mined Rabbi Abhu, halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, olo. So all these three, they were all students of Rabbi Abhu. So Rav Safra, who's carrying this jug, asks his other two fellow students, has anybody heard from Rabbi Abahu, our teacher, whether we follow halacha like Rabbi Rashbag or not? Rashbag is the one that was machmir. He said that once there's no more, you have to go back to the land. So in other words, you can't take it outside. And Tanna Kamma said you could take it outside. So which one? If halacha is Rashbag, then he's going to have to go back. Okay, Amale Rav Kahana. So one of his fellow students, Rav Kahana, says, "Hachima Amar Rabbi Abhu, halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. You're not allowed to take it outside the land of Israel. You're in violation. This is not good." Amale Rav Huna bered Rav Ika, Hachi Amar Rabbi Abhu. And halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So the other student says, no, our teacher Rabbi Abhu says halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. You forgot the N, just one word. And so now he's with his two friends, and each one is saying different things. So Rav Safra is going to have to decide between his two buddies. How's he going to decide? So he says, Amar Rav Safra nekota kelala de Rav Huna bidach. I'm going to follow Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, because the dayek vegamar shematata mipume de Rav de Rabbe kerachaba de pumpedita. Because he always learns and teaches whatever he learned from his master, word for word, exactly. And so I trust you, Rav Huna, more than I trust Rav Kahana. And happens to be Rav Huna was the one that was lenient and said, yes, it's okay, you're allowed to take it outside the land of Israel. All right, but I trust him. He didn't say because lenient. I trust you because you always follow exactly the words. You're as good a memorizer, a note taker as Rahaba from Pumbedita. Okay, who was that? How precise was that person? Amar Rahaba Amar Rav Yehuda Har Habayit Setav Kaful Haya. Setav lifnim misetav. Rechaba said in the name of his teacher Rav Yehuda that on the Temple Mount there was a colonnade, a covered portico, a double portico, because there was one within the other. And the point is, he used the word setav, which is an unusual word. Usually they would use the word itzteba, was the more common. He's using an outdated word because he's not only did he teach the halacha of his teacher precisely, but even word for word. And that's why I can call it, that's why I trust him. Good. That's what Rav Safra does. Now, after the story happened, Kare ale Rav Yosef, Ami be'aso yish'al, umaklo yagid lo. Quoting pasuk from Hosea, the pshat of the pasuk is talking about the people that they follow avodah zarah, and they follow things that are made out of wood, right, and sticks, and they follow the advice of their own sticks. So Rav Yosef makes a play on words, umaklo as mekel, kol hamekel lo magid lo. Whoever is lenient to him, he's making fun of Rav Yosef. Whoever tells him a lenient opinion, he said, "Oh, you're the best. You're the best rabbi. I follow you." Okay, so therefore, he's saying, yeah, you're only praising Rav Huna as the person who memorizes his teacher is the best because he gave you a lenient opinion, and that's not necessarily so. Okay, that's the fun story. And now regarding the unripe fruit is our last topic. It'll be Ilai kas kafniyata de Sheviit. He cut down a palm tree that had unripe dates on it during a Sheviit year. So the question is as follows: that we can think of three stages of fruit. When it's fully ripened, then you are allowed to cut it down and eat it as food, right? As long as there is other dates available. So that's permitted if it's definitely fruit and edible and ripe. At the very beginning stage, when it is just barely not even a bud, at that point it's not even considered fruit at all. So if I just want to cut down a branch on Sheviit to use for firewood, that's permitted, right? Because it's not food at all. The problematic stage is in between, when it starts to bud, but there's some unripe fruit there. Then what is the case? So that's our question. Hechi abid hachi. How could he cut down the unripe fruit? The pasuk says, said you're only allowed to take fruit to eat during the Sheviit year from whatever grows on its own. You can take it to eat, but you can't take it to destroy, and these dates are not ripe and not edible, so he should not be allowed to cut them. That's the question on the Rabbi Ilai, who did in fact cut them. Now, la. And so if you say that this restriction only applies when it reached the status of fruit, but maybe this was even pre-fruit, and it was so unripe, it was like not even anything. Rav Nahman Amar Bar Abu Hane Mathale de Orla Asire Ho'il Venasu Shomer Lepere. Regarding a law of Orla, Rav Nahman says that this is a palm tree has these flowers and a protective covering. So he says if these are orla, in other words, in the first 3 years since you planted them, they are still prohibited as fruit. So even though they're not edible, since they're part of this plant that's going to grow as fruit, they are considered fruit now. So you see that according to Rav Nahman, even something that is pre-fruit is still considered fruit. And so too here, even if it didn't yet become even an unripe fruit before that stage, is still considered something that's called fruit and therefore is not allowed. So according to Rav Nahman, it would not be allowed to cut down this unripe fruit. Rabbi Ilai did permit it. Okay. Veshomer lepere ematava. And what does that mean? That it protects it. In other cases, when would a bud start protecting the fruit? Bekufre. When it's still young and not edible, and so yet it calls it fruit even though it's not edible. So that's the question, right? Rav Nahman proved that unedible fruit is called fruit, and Rabbi Ilai consider it not fruit, and that's why he cut it down. So Rav Nahman, the Amar ke Rabbi Yose detnan, Rabbi Yose omer semadar asur mipnei shu pere upligi rabanan ale. Okay, so these two Tanaim are actually can be following. These two Amoraim are following two opinions that are found already in the times of the Tanaim, because we have a Mishnah that according to the Rabbi Yose, grapes that are called semadar, right? Just a grape bud is prohibited because it's called fruit. So Rav Nahman, who said that just a bud is called fruit, he's following the minority opinion of Rabbi Yose to prohibit. But the majority of rabbis disagree, and so therefore Rabbi Ilai, when he cut down that tree, he could be following Rabbanan. That is not called fruit at all, and therefore it doesn't even begin to fall under the prohibition of Sheviit. Question on that. Matkifla Rav Shimi min nehardea. Umi piligi Rabbanan aled Rabbi Yose bishar ilanot. Hold on, this Rabbanan, perhaps he only disagrees regarding grapes. That's when unripe grapes are considered are not considered fruit. But other things would be considered fruit, even though they're just at the beginning stage. How does he know that? So that's going to be the proof from the next Mishnah. From what point are you not allowed to cut trees on Sheviit? In other words, at what point are they considered fruit? And by cutting down the tree, you're cutting down something that is fruit. So Bet Shammai Omedim Kol Enot Misheyosiu. He says when they first start growing anything, even just the beginning leaves, blossoms, that's already considered fruit, and you cannot cut it down. It's more stringent. So carob trees, when they start making chains of carobs. Grapes, when they start forming kernels. We'll see what that means. Olives, when they start to blossom. All other fruit, when they only begin. So you see that this is this is going to show us Rabbanan, and yet he says just from when all other fruit, including dates, just from when they begin, they're already called fruit. That's going to be the question. Just a clarification on these grapes. When it says that these grapes make kernels, how big is that kernel? He says it could be a bose, which is an unripe grape, which is the same size as a grape kernel, which is the same size as a white bean. White bean? What? We're talking about grapes. Why are you bringing in beans now? No, we're talking about the size of a bean. We're not talking about actual beans that are growing from a vine. Okay. Anyway, now that we've discussed that, Rabbanan, who is the opinion that says only when a grape becomes a little bit a certain size, that's considered fruit, and not before that? That's Rabbanan against Rabbi Yose, against Rabbi Yose, yeah, because who said that even at the beginning stage. So you see, according to Rabbanan, yes, grapes, when it requires only when they begin to get bigger, but all other fruit, he said, even when it starts growing anything at all, it's already considered fruit and prohibited, and so therefore it's impossible that Rabbi Ilai would have relied on Rabbanan. So now all the way back the question to Rabbi Ilai, Rabbi Ilai bed nis chaneh chas. Oh, when he cut down that palm tree, it was a palm tree that had stunted dates. In other words, they would never ripen on the tree, and that's why they were not considered fruit at all. And that is the reason why he was permitted to cut them down. And so, with that, we conclude that this discussion of Sheviit laws. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.